We are live now on the Conversations That Matter podcast. I'm your host, John Harris. I hope you are all having a wonderful day. I have been traveling for over a week, which is one of the reasons I haven't been able to do as many podcasts. But here I am on a Saturday. I know many of you are out doing things and you'll probably listen to this next week, but I can already see people coming into the stream. If you have any questions or comments or cries of outrage, you can feel free to share those on Facebook, YouTube, or X, where I will see the comment as we stream. There's a lot we can talk about today, and this episode has the potential to be either very long or about an hour. And I'm going to try to keep it towards that hour if I can. We'll see how far we get, because there's a lot that we could talk about. I want to talk about, obviously, post-election stuff, and there's so many different directions we can go. I'm going to let some of the comments that come in actually help me decide which direction would be prudent to go in. But I do have some things I want to play for you that will steer this. So I have a few reactions to the election that I want to talk to you about. One that people online have been talking about regarding Russell Moore, Curtis Chang, and I think it's David French talking about the election and their reaction to it. They recorded it the day after. So in fact, I think one of the patrons at patreon.com/worldview conversation, if you want to be a supporter of this podcast, one of the patrons had asked me if there was a reaction from Russell Moore specifically to the election. I said, I don't think there is, actually. I haven't seen anything on X or social media. No one sent anything to me. Well, this is, I guess, the reaction is this particular podcast that was recorded. So, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some Southern Baptist reactions to this. I'm finding something very interesting in the Southern Baptist camp that you can take as encouraging, or you can be cynical about and think that this is more of a self-preservation strategy. I would love to be optimistic about this. I really would. I'm having trouble, though, because of the last few years. And so I sense a strategy going on here, but we'll talk about it. And of course, it's regarding their reaction to the election. I think there's a realization that, hey, when we tried to get people to not support Donald Trump, it didn't exactly work the way we thought. And since this is my unadulterated opinion here, but because the Southern Baptist leaders are primarily fairly unimpressive people who aren't your leader types. They're managerial elites who end up in these positions mainly because they have connections and relationships and stroke each other's egos. Sorry, that's just from watching this over the course of years and going to a Southern Baptist seminary. They are not ones to enjoy when their opinions are disregarded. And they will, I would say managerial elites in general are like this. If there's a super clear pushback or lack of acceptance of their views, they're not going to admit wrong generally. They're not going to put aside, they're not going to say I'm a failed leader and then go do something else, or I'm wasting my time here. They're going to regroup and figure out ways to push the needle, and they'll do it in more subversive ways, perhaps, or they might change their messaging. And anyway, that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. I see some of that kind of thing, I think, happening, but I'll let you decide. It's up to you what you think about some of the clips I'm going to play for you. We already got some comments. Good morning, John. Good morning, Stormy Squad. I voted for Trump, but he needs Christ. Absolutely, says Coffee and Calvinism. Did you vote to punish David French? Well, I joked about it online because who was it now? Someone had posted online that no one votes to punish David French. And then I think I was one of the first ones who wrote, I voted to punish David French, as obviously a joke. But I'm absolutely on the other side of David French. And just having listened to his podcast, I listen to these things so you don't have to. I think I've consumed way more material from leftists. Like, it's not even a comparison, as opposed to what I would consider more Orthodox Christians, political conservatives. I've just imbibed much more leftism in my life because of education, because of what I do on the podcast. So listening to David French, once again, I am reminded I am definitely on the opposite side of him in just about every single way. So yes, I want his side to lose. There is no doubt about that. Have you thanked your uneducated Gen Xer white women for pushing Trump's win? Yeah, everyone's everyone's out there trying to claim the demographic of that they're normally that they belong to is responsible for the Trump win. So if you're Latino, you're very proud that Latinos broke a little harder for Trump. Now, still, I pointed this out. Look, a lot of these demographics that they're claiming, hey, Trump made inroads. That's great, but they also voted more for Harris. Like they were a net negative on the Trump campaign. So it's good to make inroads into those groups. But yeah, of course, women in general, I think still single women, I know for sure, voted against Trump and for Harris. And it was, I think I wrote on the other day on X that, the base groups, like the groups that political organizations pull for, because they have to form political strategies to target these different groups and, form their messaging. The groups that we can identify were pro-Trump, were a net positive on Trump. So in other words, without them, there would not have been a Trump victory, are Gen Xers, are white people in general, men and women, are men in general, are working class people. So, the level of education matters in this. So more college educated, the more they're likely to vote for Harris. Middle class socioeconomic brackets favored Trump. So, I mean, this is the breakdown. Families favored Trump. If you were married, that made a huge difference. I've seen some of those charts of women who are married versus women who are single, and it's like night and day. Women who are married voted for Trump. Women who are single voted for Harris. And the vote for Harris was in large margins. If you were an evangelical Christian, of course, you voted for Trump. If you're Catholic, I think you were a little more likely to vote for Trump, not quite as much as an evangelical or a Protestant Christian. If you were Jewish, you like 80% voted for Harris. If you were a member of a historically Black denomination, Harris. So like there's these very, ranging from, minor, like Hispanic men, I think they were right on the cusp there of like the 50%. But Hispanics overall, or Latinos, I think that's the word they're using now. Latinos overall voted for Harris. So there's groups that it's like kind of on the pivot there. They're becoming, or they are more winnable, depending on the messaging that year and the conditions that year. And then there's groups that are just, they're in the tank, right? And so evangelical Christians, still 81% for Trump. They're still in the tank for the Republicans. They're still part of the Republican base. And without them, you wouldn't have Donald Trump as the president. So anyway, white dudes for Harris. John Harris. That's right. I'm just going to pretend that all those white dudes for Harris were just supporting me. That's what was going on there. The groups breaking for Trump contributed to the popular vote, lending credibility, but it's way too early to get excited that only 75% of a group voted for Harris instead of 91%. Yeah, I mean, there's still like, look, you look at these numbers and it's still like, thank the Lord. Thank you so much that we avoided this iceberg and we can actually hopefully get some things done. I'm actually pretty optimistic about round two here, just because of all the things that Trump's been through. I think he's learned. I would learn. I think most people would learn from it, who your friends and enemies are. And I think he's got some better people around him than he did before. So I'm hopeful about it. But yeah, I mean, it's still absurd that someone like Harris or someone like Biden would even approach the possibility of winning the presidency. And I think it's more absurd that there's certain Christian, quote unquote, leaders out there who seem to think that was the better option. That's insane to me. But of course, they would look at me and say that, I'm insane for thinking the way I think. So Ray says, evangelical Christian. Oh, I happen to be Hispanic male, married with kids. My wife is white and voted for Trump. Yeah, I mean, look, many such cases. There's obviously members of all kinds of groups that voted for Trump. Can we expect Harris campaigning in 2025? Well, that's what Jesse Waters says, that I don't know about 2025, but approaching the next election, she's going to try to run again, which I think is just rich. I don't see that going anywhere, but who knows? All right, let's talk about the things that I set out to talk about in this podcast. I have a number of clips to play for you, and if I hadn't mentioned it already, we're going to end with Rachel Maddow, and a clip from her. I'm kind of torn on whether to play the whole thing for you. I just don't want this podcast to be super long, but she lays out the strategy for the Democrats going forward. And I think this is the strategy. I think this is what they're going to do. And it may not surprise you, but I think it's interesting to hear from their perspective, to get a little inside scoop into, okay, they've been thoroughly lashed on a national level. And surprisingly, we haven't seen a lot of protests out there. I think we're still wondering whether there may be some closer to the inauguration, but what are they going to do? How are they going to try to get back into power? Because they're obsessed with power. That's and you know, they should value power, but they're like, that's their life, is about power. Many of these people. And so how are they going to get back into power? That's a big question. And so we need to understand their thinking to be able to counteract it. So this is going to be, I think, very important moving forward. So we'll end with that. But before we get there, let's just start off with what I think a lot of people want me to talk about, which is this Curtis Chang, as I understand it, Russell Moore, and David French. Those are the three on this particular podcast. I listened to it as I was blowing some leaves outside so that I would know what clips were the best to play for you, what timestamps. Let's start with the first question. The first question here is Curtis basically saying, how are you doing emotionally? And it struck me just listening to these things, how effeminate these guys come across. And I can't exactly quantify to you everything that I'm sensing as I listen, but it is, I mean, the introspection on how they feel and the therapy that they must go through in order to survive this cataclysmic event of a Trump victory is just hard to listen to coming from guys. It really sounds like it is more of a feminine driven podcast. And I mean, the stereotype, there's a reason that stereotype is there of leftist men being more quote unquote soy boys, or just more sensitive and in tune with their feelings. We have feelings. We should be, I think, crying at times and laughing at times. And there's a time for everything under heaven. That's not what I'm talking about. There's just a sensitivity that is palpable with these guys, where like I wouldn't want to be in a foxhole with them, really, especially Curtis. And so that's the first question of this podcast. So let's get to Russell Moore talks about how he's exhausted emotionally. I keep hearing that word. Jamar Tisby said the same. I'm just exhausted. Just exhausted. You don't hear conservatives talk like that as much when they meet political defeat. But, you know, even though we are tired, right? But we're just so exhausted. And then David French comes in and let's see. Let's start here about 8 minutes into the podcast. All right, that's the intro. Let's go about 8 minutes in here. And we'll start playing it.
We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. But there's a lot of vulnerable people out there who are not going to be fine. And so I just sort of thought of it in this two ways. One is defend the vulnerable. I mean, this is literally what I'm writing right now. Defend the vulnerable and speak the truth.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if we give in to despair, that's going to lead us to retreat into our own sort of our.
So there's David French talking everyone off the ledge. Like, you can't despair. You have to just pick yourself up. We got to keep going. He talks about dehumanization, and the Trump regime or administration is going to symbolize, or actually he's not even saying it's symbolic. Like, they're going to actually represent a dehumanization regime of some kind. There's going to be these people, I think immigrants primarily, and Ukrainians is who he's talking about, that, you know, they've lost their humanity because Trump's in office, and we just need to be about helping them. So he talks about that. And then Curtis Chang has this rich moment here. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Let's just listen to this.
Help people navigate this spiritually. David's putting on his political hat. How do we defend the vulnerable? I'm sorry, guys. I'm still wallowing in my feelings right now. I was trying to catalog my feelings yesterday, and I forgive me, but I was like journaling about this, and they all start with A. You can't take the pastor out of me. The alliterative sermonizing. This was my emotional journey. So I started in anxiety. And the way I dealt with my anxiety at around 5 p.m. was I went into big avoidance mode. I spent probably about 2 hours just digitizing my photos, clearing out my bookshelf, clearing out the garage. I mean, this election, I think, was a disaster for our country, but it did wonders for my to-do list. I just plowed through it as a matter of avoidance. Then around when I saw what was happening, I felt a surge of anger. And then I felt like a surge. I was like, what's behind that anger? Like I was just wanting to blame people for this outcome. And then I'm like, oh, I'm actually feeling like anguish. I'm feeling sadness. As David, I think especially immigrants, the people of Ukraine,
Yes. Oh,
our
gosh, yes.
planet, in terms of our future generations. I was feeling anguish for my daughters, who I know are growing up as young women who interpreted this election result as a rejection of women at some level, and a bequeathing of them of world that feels like despairing to them. So I was feeling with anguish of that, and then I ended last night. Well, actually didn't end there, but I got to a place of just also, I guess the best word I could put it was alienation. I just felt like, is this my country? Like, what does it mean that this is my country, and this is my so many of my fellow Christians help produce this result. So I was just the full gamut, and I think I'm still sorting through the combination of anxiety.
Okay, I can't do it anymore. I just can't do it. So this is the navel gazing type, just introspect. It's weird because like you listen to a political talk show, you listen to like this show, and I will at times. I mean, we had a devastation last year when my wife's mother died. I mean, I will at times come to you with some emotions and talk. I mean, that's a normal human thing, but this is a political analysis. The election just happened. What does this mean for Christians going forward? How does this affect the way that we should interact and be politically involved and be spiritually involved in our churches and all of that? And it's just so much talking about how you're feeling about it and how you're going to navigate and how this affects you personally and how this, like Donald Trump didn't do this to offend Curtis, right? Like he didn't do this as a way to really just make David French feel bad. But like there's a way they take it that's so personal. It seems like they're just so wrapped up in their own emotions on this. It's I don't know what words to even use to describe it, but it's weird. It's just odd for guys, especially. I just tell you, working in a lot of trades with guys, so being with guys a lot, this isn't how guys generally talk to each other. I'm just saying. You can show your emotions, but there is this line, and it's just he's crossing it. I'm just telling you, it's odd to me. So I'm curious if there's comments coming in, like what in the world is going on here? Why such a dramatic way of looking at this, and such a personal way of looking at this? Let's look at a few more clips. That's more of this isn't really maybe as substantive. This is more just me raising my eyebrow and being like, wow, these guys are really taking themselves very seriously. Let's talk about, though, this, which is more analysis of where they're politically at. David French at the 13-minute marker says this. He tries to, he's the one that's rallying everyone. So here's what he says.
Channel some of that anger into building up those muscles and that sort of thickness of the skin that is necessary to engage in a very cruel age, but without surrendering your compassion. Remember the Micah 6:8 formula. We need to lean in to act justly.
Okay, so we're entering this very cruel age, and we gotta toughen up here, right? It's gonna be bad. It's gonna, like, what do they think is gonna happen? What's so devastating on the horizon that now is so much worse because Trump won as opposed to Harris for Christians? Like, the only things I heard in the podcast were essentially Ukraine, and I think their analysis is totally off about Ukraine. They just think Russia's going to take over Ukraine. And then they think that migrants are going to be rounded up, and there's going to be all these mistakes made, and these people who are here legally are going to be rounded up with them, and it's going to be a nightmare. And so these are the things that are just causing them so much turmoil. And you think about a Harris presidency. This is the thing that's weird to me. Like, Harris wanted national abortion law that was equivalent to Roe, or went beyond it, perhaps. Harris was going to keep the open border policies that were wreaking havoc on actual American citizens. Harris wanted to, continue the funding that we were giving to Ukraine, which is obviously bankrupting us further, but it's also ensuring that this war continues, that the death and carnage continue. Trump wants to end it, right? Just those things alone would make a Harris administration far more cruel. Harris wanted to ensure that there were civil, quote unquote, civil rights, but these uber rights for transgender people in schools and in society would be defended, and that it would be crammed down our throats, essentially. I mean, these are cruelties. And it just strikes me as odd that they think that the Trump presidency represents cruelty, not the Harris presidency. It's such a warped moral vision that they have. But he wants to rally that anger, channel that anger into some productive action here, because we're going to need this grit. It's to like, we've had to have grit for how many years? I mean, the last 4 years, certainly. And just, I'm thinking maybe being in New York, where things are worse. Let's just say here, the county that I'm in right now went deeper blue this election. So, I mean, I'm just used to having to grow up with, it was red when I was growing up, but there was a lot more New York City influence. And now, of course, it's just insane, in my opinion, the amount of liberal influence in the area that I live. But, just even nationally, I don't care if you lived in a blue state or a red state, you've endured a lot over the last 4 years. Just from an economic standpoint, you've endured a lot, let alone social policies. You go back before that, we had 8 years of Obama before you even get to another Republican president. And everyone I've known who's a Christian who disagreed with this kind of thing, they got up the next day, they put their pants on, they went to work, they didn't complain. They were upset about what happened, but life goes on. And it's so much more difficult for some reason for people on the left, it seems to me, from my perspective, to do that. All right. So David French and these guys, David French was at National Review. Obviously, Russell Moore was at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Curtis, I don't know as much about. I know he's a professor at Duke Divinity, which is pretty on the left. So he may have been always kind of on the left. But those guys were in conservative institutions at one point. Let's see. He talks about groaning. I think it's David French, maybe. It's Russell Moore talking about groaning and trying to change what you can and not worrying about what you can't. So they're just like rallying themselves most of this podcast. And then French gives them the encouragement. This is actually going to dovetail with what Rachel Maddow says later.
Are worried and they think that, okay, wait a minute. The courts are not going to be a check on Trump at all. That the Republicans, especially if they keep the House and now that they've won the Senate, they may just get rid of the filibuster and steamroll through. There are a lot of negative things that can happen, but there are also a lot of checks still in place. And one of the things about the federal courts, interestingly enough, this is the moment where the president has less legal discretion to implement his agenda than any time in recent American history. Supreme Court precedents have really clipped away at a lot of the president's discretion. And also the courts have actually rejected a lot of what I would call MAGA reach goals, legal reach goals. So a lot of the checks and balances legally, not in immunity, not in immunity, but that's kind of moot now because Trump's going to win and he's going to be able to order the Department of Justice to drop the cases against him. But in a lot of ways, a lot of the legal checks and balances are still robust. They really are. We have accountability in 2 years. In 2 years, you're going to have another election. And we have seen giant shifts between, say, 2012 and 2014, or 2004 and 2006, or 92 and 90.
All right. So I'm just going to weigh in here. David French is essentially saying that the Democrats still have mechanisms by which they can oppose Trump. And in 2 years, there's going to be another election. So, let's put our efforts towards that. And this is similar to what Rachel Maddow says, too, that there's these restraints built into our system that can keep Trump from doing everything Trump wants to do. They don't go into deep detail on what Trump's going to do, except for, like I said, Ukraine and immigration. But they're channeling it back into political engagement, that Christians need to be political engaged, this time opposing Trump. And David French, ironically, just says this with a straight face while claiming he's a conservative. Some comments. 3 Kino says, what does he think about the cruel age of Biden-Harris DOJ imprisoning Christians who peacefully pray outside abortion clinics? And how about, I'll add to this, the January 6th prisoners who are still in prison because of they happen to be in the Capitol that day, that kind of thing. That's they're not even a thought. That's political prisoners, hiring more IRS agents to, I think, harass some Americans. I mean, Obama famously weaponized the IRS. I'm not convinced that hasn't stopped, but these are the kinds of things that would ramp up in a Harris administration, and Trump's going to put a kibosh on that. And that's cruel. Those are cruel things. But, expanding abortion, especially, very cruel, but they don't seem to think of it that way. Their priorities are so warped at this point. Drew Smith says, John, just as the government needs to take this 4 years to clean house and set this government up to never go back to the wokeness, don't you think evangelicals need to clean house too? Yeah, absolutely. It's just hard to find replacements, to be honest. This is one of the issues. Trump had a hard time the first time hiring the people necessary to run the administration because there's just not a lot of people like us. We tend to go towards careers in blue collar fields where we'll be left alone. If we're going to teach at a university, we tend to gravitate towards hard math, towards physics, engineering. That's the key. The conservatives want to avoid the hassle and raise their families, and understandably so. But because of that, there is a big gap. And in these areas where the left already polices their ranks pretty stringently, it becomes more and more difficult for conservatives to, or more unattractive for conservatives to take a course in life that will lead them into roles necessary for governing. And this is something it's a challenge we need to think through a lot more. And there are people trying to work on this, but it goes for the denominations as well. There's tremendous amount of pressure to keep the people out who aren't going to play ball and honestly elevate some very unimpressive people. That's what we've had for a long time. You would need in the SBC, you need some kind of a takeover where it's just overwhelmed if you were going to take that denomination back at the annual convention with outsiders who haven't been at SBC meetings before. And so far, we haven't had that. We haven't had enough of that. So that would be the requirement. And then once they get there, then how do you capitalize on this? How do you identify small town pastors that weren't even on the radar to fill these committee positions? That kind of thing can theoretically happen, but it's not happened thus far. So I won't go into the domination thing anymore, but there is an opportunity, I think, going forward to lock in some wins politically and maybe on the denominational levels in some sectors in the next 4 years. Okay, let's keep going with this. I only have a few more clips I think I want to play. Curtis says a few times, this is interesting. Let's see if I can go. Which one do I want to go to? He says this at least twice. I'll go to this one. Curtis talks about groaning before God, but also groaning with God. So he says this twice, at least, that God is groaning over this election and we just need to groan with him. Now, if that's true, if God is lamenting, if God's up there groaning, he just is so upset about Donald Trump winning, well, we would be, as Christians, I suppose, required to groan with him, right? So look how they elevate this to something that's incumbent on Christians. There's a moral wind that blows that they want to use to harness more leftism, more anti-Trump, anti-conservative, true conservative type of a type of disposition. So here's Curtis Chang.
It's all fine versus total despair. Don't despair. Don't despair. You have tools. You have tools, but you should be concerned. And there's a big difference between concern and despair.
Russell, I want to ask you about helping people stay out of that despair place. I think it can feel like there's easy ways that actually feel trite and cliche-ish, like you said, and there's ways that actually take us deeper into that place of groaning with God. And a lot of this.
There it is. We need to be taken into that place of groaning with God because of a Trump victory. I don't think they'd be having this conversation had Harris won. It wouldn't look like this at all. So, I can't even see them saying God would be groaning over a Harris victory, but that's a pretty bold thing to say. That's like God, the creator of the universe, is groaning that Trump won the presidency. And we just need to be, as Christians, taken into that. We need to feel that same thing. So he's wanting people to feel this emotion that God's apparently feeling. I just thought that was an incredible thing to say. And then let's see. Last clip I want to play for you. Okay, this is actually right before this. David French. Actually, I'm not. Should I play this with time? We're already half an hour in. Yeah, well, let's just go for it. Let's just play it. Let's see, 32. Let's go there. All right, so this is Russell Moore giving his analysis of why Trump won the election. Check this out.
Exactly right. That does set a parameter. I think that probably this applies more generally across American life. We're in an age that Neil Postman warned us about a generation ago, where everything has a sense of entertainment and drama. And I think that there's a sense in which Trump is able to speak to that need for meaning or purpose that comes in this kind of entertainment mediated way, in a way that that Harris could not, when what she was selling is, I want to be a boring, responsible president who is what we used to have. And Biden was giving no national sort of retort.
Okay, so it's the blame game that starts. Biden had problems, Harris had problems, but the reason that people voted for Trump was they just wanted to be entertained. They just really loved the fact that Trump had spicy press conferences and said outrageous things, and they enjoy the controversy associated with it. And he goes on and makes these points that people like the drama, and I actually think it's the opposite, to be quite honest. People don't want the drama. People would rather not think about those things. But we live in a time when those kinds of things become necessary, because the media screams bloody murder when you try to roll back or even oppose the march forward of progressivism. And Trump is doing that. So, of course, they're going to scream about it. And of course, there's going to be drama. Would there have been drama with Kamala Harris? Well, there would have been opposition from the heartland. But I mean, here's the admission, really. All the institutions are in lockstep with Kamala Harris. The entertainment industry, the education, now the medical field. No matter which sector you look at, they're pretty much in step with Kamala Harris's agenda. So you're not going to get as drama when people are in agreement. Trump now is that one little point where there's a disagreement. You still have the entertainment industry and the education industry and the medical establishment and all the rest on the opposite side of Donald Trump. So there's going to be some grinding going on, and Trump is pretty blunt. He's a blunt New Yorker with a Scottish temperament. So yeah, of course, when he disagrees, he's going to take it to him. And that's what people want. It's not the spectacle of it. It's not, we just really like watching the fireworks. Of course, we enjoy seeing, for a change, for once, these people who think they know everything told that they don't, because they don't, and because they're wreaking havoc. We like to see them lose because they're evil and because they're pushing wicked things, and because oftentimes they're also incompetent. It's not the spectacle it's not the free bread to the crowds that we're there for. Are there people that are like that? Maybe, but I don't think I've ever met them. I was rejoicing. I was looking at the media meltdown that night and I was entertained by it. That's not the reason I voted for Trump, right? I'm just enjoying the fact that the people who hate my way of life, hate the God I serve, hate the country that my ancestors built, are actually losing. It's good. It's good to know that. It's good to have that reassurance. And I thank God for it. So that's much different than, I just like controversy. Wherever it is, I'm just going to go look at controversy. Kamala Harris had plenty of entertainment value about here, but so did Biden, by the way. There's plenty of entertainment value there. I mean, she acted like she was drunk when, I don't know if she was or wasn't, but her laugh and the stupid things that she would say. And Biden, of course, with, all the crazy nonsense he would say, and questions about even like, did he just have a potty accident, at an event that they had to shuffle him out for? There was constant entertainment being generated by Biden and then Harris every day. So that obviously wasn't the factor, but Russell Moore wants to make out like it's this. I think it's an encouraging thing to tell yourself. Like, it's not really these fundamental issues so much as it is superficial things that we can somehow maybe correct. And Deneen says these men are giving lame excuses for how America voted. To them, it can't be rational. Right. That's exactly right. If you thought like we did, you would never vote the way that people actually voted. So the whole thing implies God isn't in control. They are showing their lack of understanding of the sovereignty of God. Pathetic for religion. Actually, towards the end, they do try to encourage themselves that God's in control. They start quoting Lord of the Rings all over the place. And I thought it was interesting because you could use the same quotes for like just reverse the roles. And, I've thought of like Gandalf speaking to Frodo in Moria and talking about how we're only responsible for the times in which we live. We can't choose them. I love that scene. But of course, though, I'm not thinking about it like Trump is the Dark Lord Sauron, which I think is how they're looking at it, which is hysterical to me. Okay. Let's talk about, there's a lot of comments coming in. Keep them coming. I'll try to get to them when I get a chance. That was it for this particular podcast. That's all I wanted to talk about. So to wrap it all up into a bow, these guys, they're leftists. They're subverting evangelicalism. That's their role. Megan Basham wrote about this in her book. They are part of the After Party, a political curriculum that they even market as pastors. You don't have to speak about politics and get in trouble with your congregation. We'll do that. Let us do that. Just get our curriculum and use it at your church. It's funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, which also funds radical abortion stuff. I mean, it's a left-wing organization. And it was launched from the Trinity Forum, also a very left-leaning organization. That's who these people are. That's who their friends are. That's where they're getting their finances from. And that's their role. That's the role they play. It's more obvious now than ever. So don't listen to them. Yeah, I mean, Russell Moore is the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. David French is at the Dispatch. Okay. They have some influence in a certain sector, but let them be relevant to the left if they are going to have any relevance, and let them be irrelevant to those of us who are actually trying to maintain a traditional American and Christian way of life here. I'll say this in closing on that podcast. One of the things that struck me, especially towards the end of the podcast, is how much they think that the kingdom of God equals Democrat policies, equals the Democrats being in charge. What's good for the church in their minds is what they will support. They are against any kind of, what's good for the nation, what's good for the country, what's good for America. These kinds of things they don't like. They don't like the nationalism talk. They want what they think is good for this universal body, the church. And they've used that to then, impose so the state becomes pluralistic. The state becomes universal. The state carries these qualities that the universal church has in their scheme. And so then the government becomes in charge of ensuring that universal society, a pluralistic society, remains in the United States, and Trump is a threat to that. That's really, I think, the bottom line with these guys. So that's who they are. Now, Southern Baptist stuff, I just want to briefly show you two things. This isn't going to take that long, but the first one is from this
we react
podcast.
to the 2020.
This is from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, where I went. I don't know Dan Darling. I knew Nathan Finn somewhat when I was there. And, Nathan Finn was someone, I don't know if Dan Darling signed this stuff, but Nathan Finn was someone who signed the Charlottesville Declaration in 2017 when I first got there to Southeastern. He also signed the open letter to President Trump from American evangelical, or rather American religious leaders. We need to speak. And if you read both of those things that Nathan Finn signed, both of them I think were originated at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. They're pretty much, like the first one is hey, Trump, you need to really move away from racism, extremism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, all these things that are supposedly in your cabinet. These things are in your cabinet, and you need to denounce these things. We're demanding this of you. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Bruce Ashford actually was the one who crafted that statement, and he was asked about it by a reporter, and he couldn't name. I think he talked about like 3 people in the administration who were alt-right. He couldn't even name who they were. If I'm thinking of the same statement, but if you read it, you can go online. You'd have to go to unifyingleadership.org and use the Wayback Machine to pull it up, but you can read what they wrote. And yeah, they're signaling kind of like they're tying Trump to these nefarious elements. That's what they're doing. And then they're just all, upset about it. And these are the same people who for 8 years couldn't do anything similar for Obama. Not once did they make any kind of statement like this, but they do it for Trump. Same thing with the Charlottesville Declaration. They they say things like, let's see, they quote Martin Luther King Jr. Now is the time to remind the nation, they say, and ourselves of the personal and social power of the gospel. And white supremacy will be cast out and dismantled, God willing, by prayer and fasting. So they're all up in arms about the Charlottesville thing. And they just can't believe that this happened. And we just need to separate ourselves. And people would dare to be at an event. I mean, I have the book on the shelf. Here it is. For anyone who's curious about that event, it's been so misconstrued. Charlottesville Untold. Go get this book by Ann Wilson Smith. She was there, and you'll find these guys are just lying to you about what actually happened that day. And I interviewed Ann for this podcast. But anyways, they had this whole, they bought the whole media narrative about it, right? Nathan Finn signed this stuff. That's who I remember. I haven't thought about him for years, but that's who I remember from the Southeastern days. I was like, yeah, like those guys were all like this. They were all signaling against Trump, and I knew it. I knew that's what they were doing because for 8 years of Obama, they couldn't manage to hardly say a thing. I think Danny Aiken signed the Manhattan Declaration. It was as close as they got over 8 years. Anyway, 3 statements signaling or tying Trump to these nefarious elements in one semester in 2017 when I was at SCBTS. So I was kind of like thinking, okay, like, these guys, this is an SCBTS podcast. Like they have a problem on their hands. People didn't follow their lead in evangelical Christianity. In the Southern Baptist Convention, people didn't follow them. They have signaled, they've made their intentions known. They've signaled where they're coming from. They've made that known. Are they shifting? Are they going to reveal that that's who they are? Are they going to, how do they handle this? Looking back and realizing that, hey, no one followed us. I mean, remember Dan Darling? I've done whole podcasts with Dan Darling on places like CNN, just pushing the vax on Christians and so forth. And here they are. And, so what do they have to say? So I thought this was significant. Let's go to about 14 minutes into the podcast. They talk about sports, which is so Southern Baptist to me, on a podcast about Christ. And I guess sports is part of culture, but it's I'm not going to go there. Anyway, they spend the first few minutes on that, and then they finally get to the political and cultural stuff. And this is what Nathan Finn is saying.
Obama won, and then Obama's people saying it's a permanent coalition, and then then he gets wiped up in the midterms, and then Trump wins. So American people.
And that's Benjamin Quinn, the voice you're hearing, another professor at Southeastern. He's about to ask Nathan Finn a question.
Are, as I told my class yesterday, they're fickle in a good way. America will self-correct or correct or reject what, So, I think we have to be flexible with our predictions and prognostications,
100%. And demographics is not destiny.
Right.
And it's so easy to assume that demographic changes automatically benefit one side or the other. And the Democratic Party in particular has been doing that for a generation, but demographics aren't destiny. People can change their minds. People can be persuaded that new values ought to be weighted different than old values, and every election has to be treated as a fresh take on an ongoing conversation. And only ideologues sit around and think that the future is assured because everybody is part of this demographic group or that demographic group.
Okay, all right, let's stop there. This is such a bad take in my opinion. So I already did a podcast going over the numbers with you. Liberals tend to want to see things in terms of individuals. really atomistic individuals who can switch out what they think at any given moment. And, so things like even your culture, your religion, your ethnicity, like these don't matter. These are individuals are going to do what they reason to be the best in their own best interests, or what's in keeping with the values that they share. But these things are very, they can change. They're very fluid. So that's obviously not true. It is true that there is flexibility within groups. There are people who will abandon and change. There are shifts that happen politically. They're like union households are now starting to veer towards Trump. There's shifts like that do happen in politics. There's no doubt about that. But that being said, absolutely demographics and the groups that you belong to matter a great deal when it comes to politics. And we saw that again this election. People are really excited that Trump made some inroads. I guess Hispanic men might have been the biggest like inroad you can say that he made in a minority group, to where he's kind of got them on the line of like maybe 50% could go for a Republican. So yeah, I mean, you can see shifts like that, but these, like, if you look at the big picture, these are all pretty minor. I mean, there are solid demographics that are still actually all demographics are pretty much unchanged. Florida maybe being the outlier. Someone said Texas, like 55% of the Hispanics voted for Trump, or Latinos. Florida, Trump was able to get, and if you get the generational breakdown, I know it changes, like what specific Latino group you're talking about. Like Cubans go for Trump pretty overwhelmingly. But yeah, there's some shifts that happen, but this isn't due to the fact that we're all like individuals who can just, we think clearly, and therefore we can rationally apprehend the right solution. There's some of that exists. There are people who will buck their group. There are people who will think through things and go with what they know to be true. But in general, when it comes to politics in a democratic society, if you see a shift, it's going to most likely be a shift in a group. So like in Florida, you have a group of people. Miami-Dade County went for Trump in ways it never has. You have a group shift happening. And the Democrats aren't offering things that help that community. So, and Trump was able to take a vulnerability and use it. But overall, the same demographic groups that go for Democrats still went for Democrats. The same demographic groups that went for Republicans still went for Republicans. The big difference, if there's any, is Trump was really able to turn out his base, and Kamala Harris wasn't. You have 4 more years of immigration levels the way that we've had. That may not have been possible. And it matters where you live. It matters where your family has lived for generations. It matters the conditions that have shaped you. That doesn't mean, that's not standpoint theory, by the way. That doesn't mean that you're locked into some kind of a viewpoint that you can never escape because truth is somehow subjective and there's a truth for your group and true. Like that's what the left pushes. That's not true at all. That's absolutely evil and wrong. And there is objective truth out there. People can be convinced, people can be argued, but people do have habits, and those habits do have force, and demographics is a huge part of political maneuvering. I mean, this is why Democrats target different groups differently. This is why Kamala Harris has to speak with different accents in front of different groups. The Democrats have done that for years. They say different things too. They're very secular in front of an LGBT group. They're very religious in front of a black church. They have to do these kinds of things because they're very different groups and they're trying to string together a coalition. Absolutely, demographics is destiny. And that's not a statement about like a firm, like destiny in the sense of like, this can't change at all. Like there's no movement in it. It's, somehow, free will is gone completely. Like no one makes any choices because it's all deterministic. That's not what that phrase means. That phrase just means, hey, look, you have people from another country come, they tend to share, they keep the values that they had in their foreign land, especially when they're all together and they don't have the pressure to assimilate. That's all that means. And that's absolutely true. So why do I point this out? when this is such a minor point, maybe you think, I point this out because the Southern Baptists have been on this trajectory for 2 decades at least of trying to diversify their denomination. They think that will save their denomination. Go back and read the Great Commission Resurgence book. Al Mohler makes this point. Basically, we're gonna cease to exist if it's just a bunch of old white males. So we need to attract diverse people, and that's what Southeastern has been doing with their Center for Kingdom Diversity. That's what all the entities within the Southern Baptist Convention have been trying to do, and they're not the only denomination trying to do this. So they have to try to make points, I think, like this, where it's like, hey, what we're doing in refugee resettlement and pushing years ago for the DREAM Act, which professors at that institution did, which the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, Clint Presley, did, they have to somehow justify that what they did didn't hurt Trump. Why? This is what I think. I think because they have realized that the people in their denominations just in the pew level don't like it. They're not going for it, and they're still voting for Trump. They may not even show up at the conventions in large numbers, but on the ground, they still vote for Trump. And they have to navigate this somehow. They've been pushing all this diversity stuff. They've been the ones vilifying Trump because he didn't let in Muslim refugees. That's the way they framed it, at least. Refugees from countries with terrorists that we couldn't vet was really what it was. But they've been doing this thing for years of trying to push this is a Christian thing, to have practically unlimited refugee resettlement, to have borders that are practically open, while saying that we do need a border, but we have to all welcome the immigrant and the stranger. And Donald Trump's a big meanie. They've been doing this for years. And so now they're in a pickle, to be quite frank. And they have to, I think, reinvent themselves somewhat. I think that's partially what's going on here, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. I think now I don't want to read all of that into this one little statement, but there's a number of things that cause me to think that. There's another clip I wanted to play. Okay, so let's go to this. This is kind of further confirmation of what I think I just said. I think this is, again, Nathan Finn.
To reach beyond their comfort zones whenever it comes to the types of church members who are there, and to look for ways to build bridges to the community, even people who are from vastly different socioeconomic situations. I know my church, which is a very affluent church, it's a burden that our pastors have right now. It's not always been a part of our church's culture, but it has been at times. And we're in a season now where we're really committed to this. And how do we leverage the resources that the Lord has blessed us with to reach the people who are within walking distance of our church building, but just have a vastly different life than 85% of our church members? And we're trying.
This is interesting to me, okay? This is what was drummed into my head so aggressively when I was at Southeastern, but not in these terms quite. So diversifying your church was a huge thing. You needed to diversify your church. You needed to make sure that it was diverse in the terms of age, but mostly diverse in terms of race. And of course, I pointed out many times that the people who usually said that went to the whitest churches, lived in the whitest neighborhoods, et cetera. But that's what they said, right? And they know that that's been pretty rejected among the people, I think, in the Southern Baptist Convention. That's now associated with wokeness, because the diversity push was not a, hey, everyone who loves Jesus and wants to hear the gospel and wants to hear the word preached, come on in. It was more of a, let's tailor our message to appeal to diverse audiences who are on the left. That's what it was. And there was DEI stuff and all of that. So now, like, you hear Nathan Finn saying something very similar here, but he's scaling back. Like, he's not saying the racial stuff. So first, he says demographics isn't destiny, and then he chalks up the differences in the election to class differences, not so much race differences, which, if you look at any of the analysis in the exit polls, you still see these huge margins that are, black people tended to vote for Harris, white people tended to vote for Trump. All that stuff's still there. But yeah, you could always take those numbers and you can cut the pie in so many different ways. You can show that it's, hey, married couples tend to vote for Trump. If you're single, and especially a single woman, you don't. There's all these other ways, obviously, we talked about. You can cut this up and you can analyze this. One of the ways has always been socioeconomic, but maybe it's a little more stark now because Trump is taking some of these union families are going for Trump. So anyway, he's making the same diversity push with we got to have our churches open to people of these different socioeconomic backgrounds. But what has he just gotten done saying? He's just got done saying that that's the dividing line. That's the political dividing line. And that we can't, we have to resist the sorting. This sorting is happening. People are moving to different areas to be with people like them. Churches must resist this sorting and do what? Make sure that they are reaching the people of all these different backgrounds. Let me interpret that, not just different socioeconomic backgrounds. That is in the context of these are different political views. It's still the same push that we need to open ourselves up to people on the left, people on the right. They can both be comfortable at our churches. You don't want to alienate either one group. It used to be this was cloaked in terms of racial stuff. Now it's cloaked in terms of socioeconomic, but it's the same play, I think, that's happening here. So I thought this was fascinating to listen to because I don't see on, like, practically speaking, I don't see an actual difference in the approach, but I do see a shift in the language that's being used to try to market this. And it's a shrewd shift, right? If you're trying to reach people who are now turned off to your DEI message, this is another way to it's another road to get to the same destination, in my humble opinion. All right. So these guys, they're not that influential in my opinion. You probably don't know you might know who Daniel Darling is, but I'm telling you for the SBC though, these are conversations that are interesting to listen to because the SBC is a big denomination. It's the largest Protestant denomination. And these guys are like, they're insiders and they're letting you listen as a fly on the wall to what they're saying. Even though I probably just gave them way more numbers than they would have ever had on the podcast. So now I don't know, should I have done that? I always am on the fence about that kind of thing, but so that was one. This is the other one. This is another Southern Baptist podcast. And I think Dean and Sarah might end up being one of the next SBC presidents. Keep an eye on him. He's a pastor. He has a fairly large church. Now, Dean and Sarah, I'm going to say this before I start playing.
Back to William Wilberforce.
I'm going to play this before I start playing this clip. All right. Or say this before I play this clip. Dean and Sarah has been on the opposite side of stuff over the years. Like, for example, he tweeted out, and I think he's deleted his tweet since then, but if you went back to February 14th, 2020, he tweeted out the New Baptist Network thing, and he's talking about Conservative Baptist Network in the SBC. Then this New Baptist Network thing, look how cavalierly he talks about it, is about love of Trump and being butthurt about Paige Patterson. I'm direct quote here. Don't be fooled. Inerrancy and sufficiency of Scripture. Then do video of right-wing political talk that has nothing to do with Scripture and an unbeliever could agree with. Then he says, our network of churches is great. They align with the conservatism of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, dividing over lesser tier issues, and it's ridiculous. And then Beth Moore, you're going there, are you? I'm going with you. And so this is where he's coming from, guys. This is Dean and Sarah. Dean and Sarah, when the Enemies Within the Church movie came out, I think it was Enemies Within the Church, and then Adam Greenway, president of Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, signaled hard against it. Dean and Sarah joined in that. Like, Dean and Sarah was so appreciative of Adam Greenway in that moment and stuff. This is who he is. He has tried to squash conservative efforts in the SBC. He has been quiet about, from what I've seen at least, any kind of the leftward drift that's actually happening. He is not on the same political side. And yet, listen to him in this clip. This is interesting to me. He doesn't take the same approach that you just heard from Nathan Finn. This is what he says.
Vehicle. That the God in his grace has allowed participation in for the flourishing and betterment of our neighbors, for his glory and for the love of God, most importantly, in love of our neighbor. I mean, go back to William Wilberforce. It was not heart change that he was trying to seek out. He was trying to legislate morality through, as a believer in Parliament, to end the slave trade. Go to our own nation. Go back to Jim Crow and segregation. It was through politics that eventually that changed. Go back to the institution of slavery. How did we ultimately end Nazi Germany? Through the declaration of war, which came about through politics. So I think we have made politics into a bad word when really it's always been the means that has been used by people, Christian and non-Christian, in that common grace to carry out the betterment of our neighbors.
Okay, this is not at all what he said just a few years ago. He was down on Conservative Baptist Network because it's a political organization. And now all of a sudden, no, politics is the way that we get things done. But now the Tim Keller, and he even says at one point, he's like, we're not third way in the podcast. And he signals, he doesn't say that, I don't even know if like his preference for Trump comes out, but it's pretty obvious that he's signaling against Harris in this podcast. And this is a Baptist podcast. I thought, we weren't supposed to be so political, but he's going there. Like he's political now, all of a sudden signaling right. I think a shift has happened under their feet and they know it. They know that they are somewhat discredited. They know that people aren't listening to them as much. They know that they didn't listen to them on Trump. And I think Dean Inserra is, probably a somewhat of a shrewd operator. And like I said, I think he's one of the ones to watch as far as names that will be picked for future SBC presidents. And now he is sounding like, if you listen to the whole podcast, he sounds like if you want to hear it, you'll find it. Hey, he's about political power. Like he thinks Christians should be in political power. He's signaling against, the Tim Keller third way stuff. Now, of course, his examples are like, it's like, what did he say? Slavery, Jim Crow, Nazi Germany. Like it's such a such a boomer con like example list for like why we should do politics. But okay, like, good. I mean, he's at least thinking that Christians should be involved politically and that this is somehow a good thing and they should be against abortion. He was really heavy on that. I'm telling you, this is not the guy. I mean, I was used to seeing his X account interaction was like signaling against like everything I was trying to do in the first few years, everything that Conservative Baptist Network was trying to do, everything William Wolf's trying to do now. Like he was on the other side of all of that with the Resolution 9 crowd, with the people who are going left in the SBC. And now you listen to him and he sounds different. I think you're going to hear a lot more of that coming from Southern Baptists. J.D. Greear, we just saw that. J.D. Greear signaled against Trump, I don't know how many times, like at least 4 or 5 times. He would tie Trump to some kind of nefarious view, or he would signal that exclusively against Trump and his side is how terrible they were. And now he's optimistic about a Trump victory somehow. There is a shift. And these guys, they are talking to each other. They're in their own chat groups. They're all of that stuff. They are strategizing for what to do next. I see no indication from hardly anyone. Willie Rice is like the one exception from guys in the SBC who are at these levels for repenting or even just admitting that they were wrong in the past for their views. It's just a shift. That's all it is. It's a political shift that's happening. And I think that you can expect more of this. They're going to be super careful on the DEI stuff. They're going to do like what the strategy you just saw from Nathan Finn. It's going to be like same, same kind of destination, but we're going to try to find different routes to get there. They have to be so careful. And they have a problem. They know since Megan Basham's book, they have a problem. People think of them now in terms of being on the left. Our efforts on this podcast have worked. People now see them that way, and they have to somehow manage their image. And so that's what I see happening out there. And I know I might be sounding cynical, but that's how I think. All right. Last but not least, we're going to talk about this Rachel Maddow clip. We're over an hour in, so it is going to be a little bit longer of a podcast. I'll take some questions first. Scott says they're all snakes. He went to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. He actually worked there. Let's see who else. Okay, so someone asked about Owen Strand. What do we do with Owen Strand? I don't know. I don't really listen to him. I don't know what to say. Like his takes are just so bad in my opinion most of the time. There's just no reason to listen to him. It's just my view. I'm not saying he never has a good take, but he's been so bad, so woefully wrong lately that it's just I just can't take him seriously anymore. That's a sad thing because years ago I remember I did email him and I was really thankful that he was starting to signal against the woke stuff, and I just said I appreciate it, and to see where he's gone since then, and making out like Christian nationalists and like people who are like one click to the right of him are somehow kinists and they're involved in heresy and this kind of thing. It's just okay, Owen. All All right. What else? What other question? I'm looking for question marks specifically. Would it be a good idea that the 85% bless the 15% struggling rather than solely focusing on who isn't there? I'm not sure what that's in reference to. I get if you're talking about like the David French stuff, yeah, like they should open their own pockets and help these struggling people. Maybe they plan to. I don't know. How are these tariffs going to work? Oh man, that is a question. We could do a podcast on it, but it would take a long time, and it's a little beyond me, to be quite honest with you. I did have in college macro and microeconomics, but generally speaking, the position I have on tariffs is more of a national security position, more than it is an economic position. I think that we should not be dependent on other countries for certain raw resources that we would need to wage war. So even if it hurt us economically, like it's a lot worse to lose a war. So like we should be economically, I think, like we should be self-sufficient as much as possible. So tariffs are a tool you can use to dissuade companies from investing in foreign companies to supply what we could supply in the United States if it's certain goods that we need for military. There are other things I've considered. I've had a shift in my own thinking because in 2016, I was I was not positive, we'll say, about the Trump tariffs because I was still leaning, especially economically, towards a libertarian way of thinking on some of that, very free market and so forth. And I'm still a free market guy. But I have started to think that there may be some merit to tariffs. And specifically, when I see factories that go overseas and the way that they're able to compete is by essentially like really, really poor working conditions and unsafe conditions with their workers. And, they're able to undercut us because of those kinds of things. I don't want to really incentivize that kind of thing. I would prefer that we have American workers that are producing our cars and other certain goods that we've produced for a long time. I think we have a better quality product. I think I've had the realization that the market doesn't always there's a certain wisdom to what the market wants. Like you have to take into consideration what the market wants for sure, but sometimes the market demands things that aren't always the best. Obviously, like pornography is a good example of this, right? That's a market that I think should be just squashed. There's things that people want that aren't good for them. And sometimes cheap stuff from China that breaks isn't like the best overall. There's even pollution, I think, considerations with the amount of waste that we have in plastics and so forth, and environmental factors. And so, obviously I'm skimming over the surface and probably creating way more questions than I am answers here because I have a lot of questions about it. But I do think that it's better to have more expensive products that are much higher quality, at least when it comes to certain products. And that's the way, like, my parents grew up. That's the way, especially their parents. I'm amazed at some of the farm equipment and stuff that still works from 50 years ago. When I feel like I have to keep buying rakes almost every fall season to rake my leaves, because it's just made poorly. And so could tariffs be a way to incentivize better quality products in America? I'm more open to that than I used to be. And that's all I'll say, that it might be a good discussion for podcasts in the future, perhaps. I think there's certain trades that also, I'll add this, that have traditionally been able to supply families. Dads have been able to go out and work on a single income, and they're, truckers are a good example of this. I think Tucker Carlson and I remember Ben Shapiro had an exchange where Tucker, I thought, had the better of him on this, where, Ben was kind of like, whatever the free market says, if we can automate the trucking business, that's better. And if I could click a button, I would do it. And Tucker's like, yeah, but how many divorces would this cause? What's the social cost of this? We would have to ease into it. We'd have to be prudent about it. And so I've realized some of that too, that some of these jobs, like if you could get a cheaper product if you don't manufacture it here, but at what cost socially? So not everything is a math game. Like, as far as you can't You can't look at the economy and make that the only thing that drives your economic policies. Economic policies affect social policies. And you want a true conservative wants to conserve the more than anything else, I would say the social stability of a country. Without that, what are you even fighting for? What's the point, right? So there's a lot that could be said, but yeah, I'm in my own evolution on this, I would say, and I'm very much open to discussing some of these things on a case-by-case basis. But I don't like tariffs that favor one like part of the country over the other and that kind of thing. All right, let's move on. We got to move on. That was my little aside on tariffs. Michael says that was in reference to that podcast where the liberal guy said his church is too wealthy. Oh, okay. And they need to bring in others who aren't wealthy in his church. He said it was 85%. Okay, yeah. So people need to open up we need to engage in some charity. Not just try to get the left to do social policies to take care of the poor. Let's open our own pockets. We can't realistically compete, says Spud, manufacturing with an endless pool of cheap labor. Tariffs help even the field by leveraging access to our market. Access to our market has been taken for granted. Yeah, that's some of the logic that I've heard. I'm not sure if I can, like I said, I still have this free market tendency in me that I don't like restrictions necessarily being placed on American consumers for what they can buy from other countries and that kind of thing. But there are circumstances where I think it does make sense in certain industries. Do you see Christian colleges and seminaries repenting or at least backing off the DEI woke agenda, or they'll just keep going on that? Some of them will, some of them won't. And the thing I'm concerned about more than anything is I don't think there's a big heart change. I don't see it out there at all. It's more of an adjustment to survive in this new political environment. And I don't trust these guys. I think that we need we need people in these organizations to rise up and be new leaders. That's my opinion. All right, let's shift here. I want to talk about this. This is really important. This might be the most important thing on the podcast today. We're going to talk about Rachel Maddow and what she says is the strategy going forward for Democrats.
Citizen who does not want to ashcan the American system of government, who doesn't want a strongman authoritarian system where the whole government is one guy and everything else just exists to serve him. If that is not the kind of country that you want, then yesterday's election means you have more to do for your country than you have ever done before. Because now is when the rubber really hits the road, right? We don't just flip a switch and the American system of government is gone. Democracy is gone. It doesn't work like that. I mean, not to be boring here for a second, but just getting very real. We now are just another one in the list of countries that has decided to, hey, what the heck? Let's try the strongman thing. Let's let democracy go. Let's put in an all-powerful guy instead, see how it goes. There are many more countries in the world governed by that kind of a system than there are.
Okay, so this is hysterical. Let's see here. They show Kim Jong-un, they show Xi, and they show Putin. So Trump is with them. That's what we have now. We have the dictator of North Korea, the dictator of the United States. Now, this is going to contradict what she says later. She says there's all these mechanisms we can use. But I want you to notice something. She says that we've chosen against democracy. That's a very interesting thing. He won the popular vote, too, this time around. So they can't use that. So how exactly is this against democracy? And this is the Achilles heel of democracy. In a democracy, theoretically, the people who are under it can vote to end democracy if they wanted to, right? That's not what happened here, but that theoretically could happen. And what do you do at that point? When the will of the people is they don't want a democracy anymore. This is like a catch-22. Like you either honor democracy and end democracy, or you honor democracy and you try to restore or preserve democracy. So Rachel Maddow, I'm just saying, given her assumption here, which is that Trump is this strong man who's against democracy, he still got voted in through a mechanism that was democracy. So that's a really good argument against democracy, Rachel. Like if that's, you're showing the weakness in it, apparently. If it's democracy, apparently falls into authoritarianism of some kind. So these people, even when the vote goes against them, they're still going to claim that it's against democracy, because it's really democracy for them is whatever they're in control of. That's what's best for people. That's what people really want. That's what they are wedded to, in some sense, these like, for them, expanding your choice in a free market of some kind, or at least a market that is as free for vices as can be. The only inhibitions in that freedom are taking from us to fund that freedom for those who can't afford it, basically. But that kind of a my body, my choice liberalism, they do hold that as sacred. You should be able to operate and do whatever you want, however sinful it is. And Trump is going to put the kibosh on that. That's what they're complaining about, and that's what democracy is to them. So it's whatever system, and so the mechanism to get there, which is voting, that's secondary to the arrangement they want, which is what I just described. Anyone can come across the border. Anyone can get an abortion. This is all funded by the working class people who don't do those things as much, but they will enable others to express themselves to the fullest extent that they want to. So they don't look at it like families being the building block, like a social order coming from a divine source. This is all just whatever individuals want to do. And that's how Trump is a threat to democracy in their mind.
Are governed by ours. We are the only 248-year-old multiracial pluralistic democracy in the world.
That's not true. Maybe 248, but what do you do with Great Britain? What do you do with a lot of European countries right now that have more than one group? I mean, they're essentially becoming empires, or countries at least, that have more than one nation within them. United States isn't unique in this sense.
And shall we keep it? A lot of our fellow Americans say we shouldn't.
And I will point out the United States wasn't always like what she describes either. It wasn't, for the whole 248 years, it was not like this.
Now we know. Now we know for sure. But a lot of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, say we should keep that system, which means time to fight for it. And yes, Americans did fight for it by working on this election, by trying to get the candidate elected who was both the Democrat and the small d Democrat. She didn't win. The strongman candidate won instead. But now history doesn't end. Time doesn't stop. Now we have the benefit of knowing, how this has gone in every other country that has been through a democracy to authoritarian transition.
This is why they keep saying Trump is a dictator, Trump is Hitler. They think that history does follow these similar patterns, and that the arc of history is, she's going to get there eventually, but the arc of history is going to be towards further democracy and greater levels of this kind of freedom. And they think, though, that we're on this kind of like alternative reality temporarily, where Donald Trump is taking us down the dictator route. And so the things that have happened in dictatorships are going to start happening here, and they expect that to happen here. Now, I don't know how you say this and you prevent riots from happening. If you really think Trump is going to pull off what Stalin did, they don't really usually reference Stalin, but what Hitler did, or in this case, what Kim Jong-un has done, and his father, Kim Jong-il, if you think that that's what Trump is, then you're going to freak out and you're going to have anxiety. I don't know how you escape that. That's obviously ridiculous, but that's how the hard left at least thinks. I think Curtis Chang is having a hard time with this. He thinks this kind of thing. And
sadly, there are a lot of them. We have the benefit of seeing what's happened in those other countries, though. And what we know is that the more ground the authoritarian takes, the harder it is to ever get that ground back. And so the first order of business is to stop them from taking any uncontested ground right from the outset when it comes to what our system of government is and what our democracy is. Right? We know from other countries' experiences that quickly, I mean now, in the next few weeks, if not the next few days, they are going to start pushing to see how far the country is going to let them go without pushback, without protest. And part of this is because it's just psychologically advantageous.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. She goes on about how we need to resist. That's most of this video. We need to resist. What ways can we do it? Let me skip ahead. I'm 4 minutes in here.
That as of today, American citizens who do want to hold on to democracy, we know exactly what we're going to be spending the next days and weeks and likely years of our life working on. And the strategic first moves come into focus quickly when you think about what other countries have shown us about how hard it is to regain democratic ground once an authoritarian.
They show these guys again. They just keep linking Kim Jong-un and Xi and Putin to Trump. It's hysterical.
Leader has taken that ground. And the work has to be done now. The work that has to be done now, it has to happen in sort of every aspect, every corner of our society. The U.S. military needs to give the American people binding assurances that they will not deploy U.S. military force against the civilian population in this country. They can give those assurances, and now they should. The free press needs to give the people of this country assurances that they will not become state TV, that they will stand and fight together. They will put aside rivalries and petty professional differences. They will stand and fight together as the free press, as the fourth estate, as an institution that is a pillar of our democracy, as these guys on the other side inevitably start picking off individual journalists, individual publishers, individual news organizations to try ultimately to turn us all into some American accented version of RT. If the Democrats.
All right, so yeah, Russia Today. So we're gonna turn into state. This is like bonkers. This is insane. Like unrealistic to an extent that it's hard to even quantify. But that's what she actually believes, and that's what her viewers actually believe. Like we could be on the precipice of the entire media being controlled by Donald Trump and the administration, and forcing them to say what they want them to say and pushing their agenda. And there's no pushback. There's no freedom of the press anymore. They're just going to take it away. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous. We know that that's not even a policy that's being considered. But imagine with me, just for the sake of argument, imagine that actually happened. Imagine Trump said, "Your guys are going to lie no longer. I'm going to," I don't know what he would even do, what mechanism he would use, but you cease to exist. If that happened, what would actually be the effect of that? You would have an authoritarian regime, let's say, authoritarian administration that takes away this freedom from a bunch of organizations that have leaned so far to one side that I would say they could all be considered state-run media. The last 4 years, that's what they were. So like this is my point. Like she's so afraid that their freedom is going to be taken away, but they've functioned as state-run media for 4 years. They've just done the bidding of the Democrat Party. Fox News is maybe the only exception, and I would say they're not conservative. They're just they try to be fair and balanced. Some people think they're nutcases. They have people that are more on the right on Fox News. There's no doubt about that. Their reporting, though, tends to be I would say more moderate, and they're just, compared to all these guys, they look super conservative because of that. Look at even 2020 and how they called, was it Arizona first? And they did not give Trump the time of day. And just like the other news organizations. So, that's your one little outlier. Okay. So everything else is controlled by leftists, ideological leftists. It's funded, much of it, by left-leaning organizations. They've been state-run media effectively, but she can't see that. She can't see that that's how they've operated. She's so afraid that they will cease to continue operating that way. And if the shoe were put on the other foot, it would be the abridgment of this freedom. So Biden says, according to Ray, let's see, Biden Pentagon just gave the order before the election that troops use deadly force against U.S. civilians. This is breaking news right now. Let me see. Let me go to a news website, see what's going on. I don't see it on the front pages of stuff. Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess Biden's a threat to democracy now, according to but Rachel Maddow doesn't think of, she can't put the shoe on the other foot. She can't be self-reflective. None of these people seem to be able to do that.
Democratic Party takes the House, expect Article 1 of the Constitution to come under attack. By which I mean expect efforts to hollow out the power of Congress, to make Congress a just-for-show institution, right? There's a reason actions of the Russian Duma never make news, right? Expect efforts to attack Article 1, to make it a just-for-show institution that has had its real powers taken over by the executive, by the dear leader. We are going to need a plan and some steel spine inserts among elected officials in Washington.
Okay, let's just stop there. Someone that made a good point here. Matt Borish said, "Oh, Rachel, are you against censoring X?" Yeah, where were all these people in 2020 when social media outlets were censoring the people who use their platforms on a number of issues? It wasn't just the COVID stuff. She's not for this stuff unless it's benefiting her side.
To head that off, we're going to need the...
Let's skip ahead. I can't do this. All right, let's go. She talks about the Supreme Court. She talks about, let's see.
Authoritarians need to crush that because it's not about them. Strongmen leaders have a tendency to become not just leaders of the government, not just dictators, but totalitarians because they can't have anything going on in the country that isn't about them or for them.
Okay, so it's more just rhetoric. Let me get to the end where it gets a little more tangible.
Perceived enemies. If they really are going to try to undermine the American system of government, which is what they've made this campaign about, then in the next days and weeks, they are going to be testing to see what they can get away with without pushback. They are going to do the things they can do easily, and they will have to put off the things that turn out to be hard. So what's going to be hard for them? That's where the American people come in. We do not only work for our country and for our democracy in elections. We work for our country and for our democracy against anyone, anywhere, anytime who seeks to do it harm. And so there's a lot to do. Time doesn't stop. History doesn't stop. We have stuff to do. Millions of Americans woke up today to the realization that although you worked as hard as you could to try to bring about the election outcome you wanted, you did not get the election outcome you wanted. And so now what that means is that there is a whole new raft of stuff to do. Hope you are feeling scrappy. Hope you are tapping into your inner pirate energy. Because it is one thing to be a defender of the realm. It is another thing to be in opposition. And opposition can be a lot of things. It can be dangerous. It can also be fun. It would have been nice to win the election. Didn't. Okay. Time to save the country.
Okay, so this is the left doing what the left likes to do. The left feels very comfortable in the position of being the underdog in their minds. They see themselves like that even when they're in power. They have all these forces set up, lined up against them. They're never in control. They're always fighting these greater forces. Obama had 2 terms, and end of his second term, he was still saying these big business forces are keeping him from doing what he wants to do. That's how the left operates. The right has traditionally, well, it's not even true, the last 50 years, the right has been in this position of like, hey, we're the normal. We're, and up until recently, thinking they even had corporate and big business, maybe until 2020. But we're the ones that are in control, even when they're not. But this is way more, I would say, fundamental to the left's identity. We're the resistance, you know. We are the ones against the man. And that's what they love. And so what you're going to find is the left, obviously they're going to resist, but they're going to gum up the gears everywhere they can. I think I'm actually wondering what's going to happen now with like protests and riots and that kind of stuff. I'm assuming we're going to see some of that, but I didn't play the clip, but Rachel Maddow wants people to get involved in voluntary organizations. She wants basically people to dedicate their lives to politics for the next 4 years, to getting as much power as they can in their local levels so that they can get in these swing states, overturn or like fix the problems that they had and get back in the driver's seat. And this is one of the things Republicans can't let happen. Conservatives can't let happen. Christians cannot let happen. We have to be involved in our communities ourselves. And where we see this happening, we have to stop it ourselves. We're going to have to be involved in voluntary organizations. We're going to have to be involved on the local level in government. We're going to have to meet them when they come out to fight in these ways. And I think the actual truth of the matter is Trump is the resistance, and you are part of the resistance. You are the ones that are lined up against every other institution in society. That's just the reality. Everything is lined up against you. You happen to have this one win, and it creates an opportunity, but you have to build on it. That's the only way forward. The next 4 years this is the beginning. This can't be the end. You have to lock in the gains, push hard aggressively. And it's not the time to just go on vacation at this point. The left they don't go on vacation. They're going to turn it up, and they like being in this position. They like being allowed to burn stuff too. So we'll see how that goes. So yeah, just food for thought. Think about ways you can be involved. That's what they're going to do. All right, questions, and then we'll end. Let's see. What is your inner pirate spirit anyway? I don't know. I really don't know. They view themselves as the resistance. They're breaking the rules. They like to be against the rules. They've had the power. Everything that they own right now should give them the sense of like, we control stuff, but they don't, it's not their nature. They don't like that. Cause like the real rebel right now is someone who like stays with their spouse and raises kids in the suburbs or the, rural areas or whatever. Like that's the real resistance. That's what they hate. So they want to view themselves as a resistance once again. Someone break it to her. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. That's true. We do have, in political science terms, we do have a democratic form of government in the sense that we have people in the government who, or rather people in the population who make decisions that are governmental. So, but yes, we are a constitutional republic. That is true. We're not a pure democracy where every decision is put up to a majority vote. We have representatives that make decisions for us. All right. I think I'm going to probably end it there. Before I end it, though, did I not pull it up? Let me see if I can pull it up. I don't think I can. Well, let me do this. I forgot to actually show you some things that I need to show you. So I need to plug this. It's getting down to the wire on this, and I need to support it pretty hard here. Christianity and the Founding Conference. So if you go to christianityandthefounding.com, that's the website. I'll show you what it looks like actually here. Let's see. Okay. Here it is. So if you go to christianityandthefounding.com, you can register. It's only $30 for this great conference. Sam Smith, the chair of the history department at Liberty University, is going to be there. Pastor Jared Lavelle, Zach Garris, Sean McGowan, Stephen Wolfe, Jacob Tanner, and myself. We're going to be presenting on the Christian traditions that have made America what it is, April 25th through 29th. You're going to want to sign up sooner rather than later. And it's going to be good. I'm really excited about this. It is in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, which is next to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So think Lancaster, if you know that, where that is. That's where we're having the conference. Sign up today, and I'll see you April 25th through 26th. More coming. God bless. Bye now.